The blizzard tore across the highway like a living thing, erasing the road with sheets of snow and ice. Most drivers had already abandoned the idea of traveling and pulled off somewhere safe. But for one young mother and her children, stopping wasn't an option, and that choice nearly cost them everything. What began as a desperate trip home became a night no one in town would ever forget. Because on that frozen road, a stranger's courage and kindness set events in motion that no one could have predicted. Lauren Hayes gripped the steering wheel tighter as her old Dodge Caravan rattled along the empty highway. The wipers scraped furiously, but they couldn't keep up with the storm. Her 7-year-old son, Jacob, sat in the back bundled under a blanket, while his little sister, Molly, just 5, hugged a stuffed rabbit against her chest. Lauren told herself she could make it. She wanted to reach her parents' farmhouse outside of Clearbrook before the roads closed. After her messy divorce earlier that year, she hadn't spent a single holiday with family, and she refused to let another storm keep her away. But determination could only carry her so far. The wind howled, rocking the van as if invisible hands were trying to shove it off the road. The heater was weak, blowing lukewarm air that barely cut through the chill seeping in from the windows. "Mom, are we almost there?" Jacob asked, his voice tight. "Soon," Lauren said, forcing calm she didn't feel. Her knuckles were white on the wheel. Then the van gave a violent shudder. The engine sputtered, coughed, and went dead. The headlights dimmed, leaving only the swirling whiteness outside. "No, no, please," Lauren twisted the key again and again, but the only response was a clicking sound. The battery was gone. The van was silent, lifeless. Panic clawed at her chest. She knew what it meant: no engine, no heat. The temperature inside would drop fast. She turned to look at her children, their faces already pale in the dim light, their breath fogging in the cold. Images of news stories she'd once read, families trapped in cars during winter storms, flashed through her mind. "God, please," she whispered. Then, through the blinding snow, she saw them, headlights. An old pickup truck rolled to a slow stop behind her van, its tires crunching on the ice. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall man bundled in a heavy coat and wool cap. He moved with steady purpose, the snow clinging to his beard and shoulders. "You all right in there?" he called out, his voice carrying over the wind. Lauren hesitated. Her instincts screamed to be careful, but Jacob's shivering form and Molly's frightened eyes reminded her she didn't have the luxury of caution. "Our van, it died," she called back, her words breaking. The man gave a short nod. "Pop the hood. Let me check." Her hands shook as she pulled the latch. She stayed in the driver's seat, hugging her coat tight, while the stranger worked under the hood. His movements were quick, sure, he knew what he was doing. A few minutes later, he closed it with a firm thud and walked back to her window. "Starter's gone," he said flatly. "You won't be driving this anywhere tonight. If you stay out here, the cold's gonna take you and those kids. My truck's old, but she runs strong. Let me get you someplace warm." Lauren's heart hammered. She looked at her children, at Molly's tiny hands clutching the rabbit. The man's tone was calm, protective even, not threatening. Something in his eyes told her he meant no harm. She gave a small nod. "Okay." The man helped her gather a few essentials. He scooped Molly into his arms with surprising gentleness, shielding her from the wind, while Jacob clung nervously to Lauren's coat. Inside the truck, the heater blasted glorious warmth. Color returned to her children's cheeks as Lauren exhaled shakily. "My name's Curtis," the man said as he guided the truck back onto the road. "Curtis Bennett. Got a little repair shop in town. Guess I was in the right place at the right time tonight." Lauren managed a faint smile. "I'm Lauren. These are my kids, Jacob and Molly." Curtis nodded once. "Good to meet you. Let's get you safe." The truck rumbled forward, carrying them deeper into the storm. Lauren felt relief, but also a gnawing uncertainty. She didn't know this man, didn't know where the night would lead. All she knew was that something about this moment felt bigger than chance. Because what lay ahead was beyond anything she could have imagined. Curtis kept his hands steady on the wheel, eyes squinting through the snow as if he'd driven these roads blindfolded 100 times. Lauren sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her kids tucked safely between them in the bench seat. The heater hummed, wrapping them in life-saving warmth, but the tension in her chest hadn't melted yet. She watched Curtis out of the corner of her eye. His jaw was firm, his expression unreadable. He wasn't much older than her, maybe late 30s, but the lines on his face suggested he'd seen his share of hard winters. His coat smelled faintly of motor oil and pine, and his calloused hands gripped the wheel with quiet strength. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, her voice breaking the silence. "Back to town," he answered without looking at her. "I've got a little garage and a place upstairs. Not much, but it's warm. Safer than trying to push through to the farmhouse tonight." Lauren hesitated. Staying overnight with a man she didn't know, in a place she'd never been, set her nerves on edge. But when she glanced at Jacob, who had already dozed off against her arm, and Molly, whose tiny hand still clutched Curtis's sleeve as though she trusted him more than anyone, Lauren swallowed her doubts. "Thank you," she whispered. Curtis just nodded, as if her gratitude wasn't necessary. The drive was slow. At one point the truck skidded on ice, sending Lauren's stomach lurching, but Curtis corrected it smoothly, never panicking. By the time they reached the outskirts of Clearbrook, the storm had grown even worse. Streetlights flickered under the weight of ice, and most shops were shuttered, dark windows glowing faintly with backup generators. Curtis pulled into the lot of a squat brick building with a faded sign that read, "Bennett's Auto Repair." He parked beside the garage doors and cut the engine. "Let's get you inside." The small apartment above the shop was modest, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was warm, with a fire already crackling in a stove. Curtis set Molly down on a warm couch, and she instantly curled into the cushions, sighing with relief. Jacob followed, pulling a blanket over himself. Lauren stood awkwardly by the door, brushing snow from her coat. "I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't stopped." Curtis waved a hand. "Don't mention it. Folks don't last long out there in this kind of cold." His voice softened just a bit. "You did right letting me help." He disappeared into the kitchen and returned with steaming mugs of cocoa, setting them on the coffee table. The kids' faces lit up as they wrapped their hands around the cups, sipping eagerly. Lauren's chest tightened at the sight, she hadn't expected this kind of care. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. Curtis shrugged. "Sometimes doing the right thing's the only thing." As the hours passed, the storm outside raged on, rattling the windows. Lauren sat with her children, listening to their breathing slow as they drifted to sleep. But her mind stayed restless. Why had Curtis been on that road in the first place? Why had he risked himself for strangers? She found herself asking. "Were you just driving home when you saw us?" Curtis sat in a chair by the fire, arms folded across his chest. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "I'd gone out to deliver a generator to an old widow outside town. Her power goes out every storm. Didn't feel right letting her sit in the dark." Lauren blinked. Something about the simplicity of his answer cut through her guardedness. This man hadn't just helped her, he had made it a habit of helping. Still, she sensed there was more to him. A heaviness behind his eyes. Later that night, after she had tucked blankets around her children and ensured they were safe, Lauren found herself standing by the window, watching snow pile high against the garage doors. Curtis was still in the chair, staring into the fire. His profile looked tired, worn down by more than just the day. "You saved us," she said softly. "But you look like the one carrying the weight of the world." His eyes flicked to hers, then back to the flames. "Not the world," he said. "Just my own mistakes." Lauren wanted to ask more, but his tone made it clear the wall was still up. So she let silence fill the space between them. But deep inside, she knew this man was more than just a mechanic who happened to pass by. Something in his story was waiting to be told. And when it came out, it would shake everything she thought she knew. Because what lay ahead wasn't just kindness repaid, it was the start of something unthinkable. Lauren woke to the smell of coffee and the low hum of voices. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the comfort of the blanket tricking her into believing she was back home. But when she opened her eyes, she saw the small apartment above the garage, her kids still curled up safely on the couch. Curtis stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. Beside him, an older woman with gray hair tucked under a knit cap was warming her hands near the stove. She gave Lauren a kind smile. "Morning, dear," the woman said. "I'm Mrs. Green. Curtis came out to check on me last night when the storm hit. When he told me about you and the little ones, I thought I'd come see if you needed anything." Lauren sat up quickly, tugging her sweater tighter. "Oh, you didn't have to." Mrs. Green waved her off. "Nonsense. I live a block down. Curtis has dragged me out of more snowbanks than I care to admit. I owed him a visit." Curtis set a mug in Lauren's hands. His eyes were softer in the daylight, though still shadowed by something unsaid. "Storm's not letting up yet," he said. "Roads are closed for another day at least. You and the kids can stay here until it's clear." Lauren's instinct was to protest. She didn't want to impose, but when she glanced at Jacob and Molly still wrapped in blankets, she swallowed her pride and nodded. "Thank you." The day passed slowly. With the blizzard howling outside, the apartment became a cocoon. Jacob helped Curtis in the garage for a while, his natural curiosity lighting up when he got to hold a wrench. Molly followed Mrs. Green around the kitchen, asking questions about every spice jar and dish. Lauren found herself watching Curtis more than she intended. He was patient with Jacob, showing him how engines worked, letting the boy feel useful. It stirred something in her chest, a painful reminder of how absent Jacob's own father had been. Later, when the children were napping, Lauren stepped into the garage. Curtis was hunched over a workbench, polishing a carburetor. The smell of oil and metal hung heavy in the air. "You didn't have to keep them busy all day," she said. Curtis didn't look up. "Kids deserve to feel like they matter. Doesn't take much to give them that." There was a pause. Then Lauren asked, "Do you have kids of your own?" His hand stilled on the rag. Slowly, he set the carburetor down. "I did," he said quietly. Lauren's breath caught. She hadn't expected that answer. Curtis leaned against the bench, staring at the floor. "My boy, Marcus. He'd be about Jacob's age now. Bright kid. Loved trucks, just like me. But, when his mama left, she took him with her. Said she didn't want him growing up around a man who couldn't keep his life together. Haven't seen him since." The weight in his voice made Lauren's chest ache. She could hear the unspoken grief in every word. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Curtis shrugged, though his eyes glistened. "Some mistakes you don't get to fix. You just live with them." For the first time, Lauren saw past the quiet strength to the pain beneath. This wasn't just a mechanic who had helped a stranger on the road. This was a man carrying loss heavy enough to silence a room. That night, after the storm finally began to weaken, Lauren lay awake on the couch beside her children. She stared at the ceiling, Curtis's story echoing in her mind. She thought of her own struggles, the bitter divorce, the sleepless nights worrying about money, the fear of raising 2 kids alone. She had felt invisible, discarded, abandoned. But now, seeing Curtis, she realized pain wore many faces. And maybe, just maybe, the people who looked the strongest were often the ones fighting the hardest battles. The next morning brought a pale gray sky and quieter winds. Curtis knocked gently on the doorframe. Roads are opening, he said. I can tow your van back here and get her running again. Won't be cheap for the parts, but labor's on me. Lauren blinked. Why would you do that? You've already done more than enough. Curtis shifted, uncomfortable with the question. Because last night, I remembered what it felt like to watch someone I love shiver and not know if I could help. I won't stand by and let that happen again. Her throat tightened. Gratitude tangled with something deeper, a connection forming between two people who hadn't expected to find each other. Lauren looked at her children, then back at Curtis. For the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. But she had no idea the storm's end wasn't the end of their troubles. Because soon, whispers in town about what happened that night would spread. And not everyone would see Curtis's kindness the way she did. What came next would test not only their bond, but the whole town's willingness to face its own prejudice. By the time Lauren's van was hauled into the garage and the storm finally cleared, word had already begun to spread through Clearbrook. In a small town, stories traveled faster than the snowplows. Neighbors whispered about how Curtis Bennett had taken in a stranded woman and her 2 kids during the blizzard. Some praised him, saying it was just like Curtis to step up when others wouldn't. But others twisted the story, their voices laced with suspicion and prejudice. Lauren heard the murmurs herself when she walked into the grocery store a few days later. Did you hear? That single mom and her kids stayed the night at Curtis's place. The black mechanic from out on Main. I don't care what the story is, that doesn't look right. People like him. Well, you know. Lauren clenched her jaw, pulling Molly's hand tighter. The casual cruelty stung. Curtis had saved their lives, given them warmth and safety when no one else was on the road, and this was the thanks he got. When she returned to the shop that afternoon, she found Curtis bent over her van's engine, grease streaking his arms. He didn't look up when she entered. You've heard the talk, haven't you? She asked quietly. Curtis wiped his hands on a rag. His face was unreadable. Doesn't matter what folks say. They've been talking about me since the day I opened this shop. This is nothing new. But it's not fair, Lauren said, her voice tight. You saved us. You. Curtis cut her off gently. Fair don't always come with the choices we're given. I didn't help you to get credit. I did it because it was right. His calm acceptance made her heart ache. She wanted to fight back, to defend him, but Curtis had clearly lived with this for years. Days turned into a week, and the van was finally ready. Curtis charged her only for the parts, refusing to take a dime for labor. Lauren insisted on paying, but he shook his head. You've got kids to raise. That's payment enough. The children had grown attached to him, especially Jacob, who begged to come back to the shop and help. Curtis always found small tasks, a bolt to hold, a rag to wipe down a tool. Molly would sit on a stool, coloring in a notebook he'd bought her from the corner store. For the first time since her divorce, Lauren saw her kids smile like they used to. And deep down, she knew Curtis had something to do with it. But not everyone was smiling. One evening, as Lauren walked to her car after work, she overheard 2 men outside the diner. Can you believe it? That mechanic cozying up to that Hayes woman. Folks like him don't belong here. Exactly. She ought to think about her kid's reputation before running around with someone like that. Lauren froze. Anger burned hot in her chest. Without thinking, she spun toward them. You don't know him, she snapped. He risked his life in that storm to save me and my children. Where were you? Sitting here gossiping over coffee? The men looked startled but quickly sneered. Careful, miss. Not everyone in this town's gonna see things your way. Lauren drove home shaking, fury and fear mixing in her veins. That night, she told Curtis what happened. He listened quietly, then sighed. I told you, people talk. But you need to be careful, Lauren. Folks can be cruel, and I don't want you or the kids caught in the middle. She met his gaze, her voice firm. We're already in the middle. And I won't let anyone shame me for being grateful to the man who saved our lives. The tension in town grew, whispers turning into sharp looks turning into cold shoulders. Yet, in the midst of it, Lauren and Curtis's bond deepened. One evening, Jacob asked the question that made the room go still. Curtis, can you come to Grandpa and Grandma's house with us sometime? They'd like you. Curtis's hand stilled on the wrench he was holding. He glanced at Lauren, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Lauren gave a small, encouraging nod. I'd like that, kid, Curtis said finally, his voice low. For a moment, hope bloomed. But in a town where old wounds and prejudice ran deep, that simple hope would be tested in ways none of them were prepared for. Because what happened when Curtis finally stepped into Lauren's family circle would shake everything. The roads had finally cleared enough for Lauren to make the drive to her parents' farmhouse with the kids. Snow still clung to the fences and rooftops, but the sky was a crisp winter blue. Jacob and Molly chattered excitedly in the back seat, thrilled at the idea of seeing their grandparents. Curtis followed in his truck, his expression cautious but steady. Lauren had asked him to come more than once, assuring him her parents would see the man she saw, the one who risked his own safety for strangers, who gave her children laughter when they'd almost forgotten how to smile. But Curtis wasn't naive. He knew that not everyone looked past the color of his skin. Still, when Jacob's hopeful eyes had met his, Curtis couldn't say no. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long gravel drive, smoke curling from the chimney. Lauren's mother, Diane, was already at the door when they arrived, wrapping Jacob and Molly in tight hugs. Her father, Frank, stood back, his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the man stepping out of the truck. Lauren's stomach knotted as she led Curtis up the steps. Mom, Dad, this is Curtis Bennett. He's the man who rescued us during the blizzard. Diane's eyes softened. She extended her hand warmly. We owe you everything. Thank you for saving my daughter and grandchildren. Curtis nodded respectfully, shaking her hand. Just did what anyone should have done, ma'am. But Frank didn't move. His jaw tightened. You could have called the sheriff. Folks would have helped. Lauren's voice sharpened. Dad, no one was out there. He was the only one who stopped. Curtis kept his posture calm, though he felt the weight of Frank's stare. I wasn't about to leave them to freeze. That's all. For a moment, silence stretched thick between them. Finally, Frank muttered, humph, and turned back inside. Dinner that evening was a mix of warmth and tension. Diane fussed over Curtis, insisting he take second helpings of roast beef. Jacob proudly told his grandparents how Curtis had let him hold a wrench, while Molly giggled about the cocoa he made. But Frank said little, his eyes flicking between Curtis and Lauren with unspoken judgment. When the children were sent to the living room with dessert, Frank finally spoke. So, Curtis. You own that shop in town? Yes, sir. Bennett's Auto Repair. Been running it about 10 years now. Business any good? Curtis sipped his water before answering. Steady enough. I get by. Frank leaned back in his chair, his voice carrying an edge. And what exactly do you want with my daughter? Lauren's fork clattered against her plate. Dad. Curtis's expression didn't change, though his voice dropped lower. I didn't come here wanting anything. I came because your grandkids asked me to. Because your daughter trusted me enough to let me. Diane's hand shot to her husband's arm. Frank, that's enough. But Frank's glare didn't waver. I don't need some outsider hanging around my family. Don't matter what he did in one storm. The words hung in the air like frost. Curtis rose from the table, his chair scraping back quietly. I think it's best if I head out. Thank you for the meal, ma'am. Lauren shot up. Curtis, wait. He shook his head gently, his eyes meeting hers. It's all right. Jacob and Molly rushed back into the room, confusion on their faces. Where are you going? Jacob asked. Curtis knelt, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. I'll see you soon, kid. Promise. And with that, he left, his boots crunching in the snow as the door shut behind him. Lauren spun on her father, fury in her voice. Do you realize what you just did? He saved our lives. And you treated him like a criminal. Frank's face hardened. I'm protecting this family. That man doesn't belong here, Lauren. You're too blind to see it. Diane spoke up, her voice trembling. Frank, you're wrong. That man's got more decency in him than half the folks in this county. But Frank wouldn't listen. Lauren gathered her coat and the kids. If Curtis isn't welcome here, then neither are we. That night, she drove back into town, her heart heavy. When she reached the shop, Curtis's truck was parked out front, the light in the upstairs window glowing faintly. She wanted to go up, to tell him what had happened, to tell him she didn't care what her father thought. But when she reached the door, she hesitated. Because the truth was, Curtis wasn't just a rescuer anymore. He was becoming something more, someone she needed, someone her kids already loved. And the unthinkable part wasn't the storm, or the gossip, or even her father's rejection. It was what came next. Because Curtis's past, the son he hadn't seen in years, was about to collide with Lauren's present in a way none of them expected. Lauren barely slept that night. She kept replaying her father's words, the coldness in Curtis's eyes when he left the farmhouse, and the way Jacob had clung to his coat as though afraid he'd disappear forever. By morning, she knew she had to see him. She dropped the kids at school, promising she'd pick them up early for hot chocolate, then drove straight to the auto shop. Curtis was outside, wrench in hand, working on a pickup with the hood popped. He looked tired, his shoulders heavy. Curtis, she called softly. He glanced up, gave a faint smile. Morning, Lauren. She stepped closer. I'm sorry about last night. My dad, he doesn't speak for me. Or the kids. Curtis wiped his hands on a rag, nodding slowly. I figured. Still, it stung. Her chest ached. You didn't deserve that. Before he could answer, a car pulled into the lot. The door slammed, and out stepped a young man, maybe 21, with sharp eyes and a restless energy. Curtis froze. His hand clenched the rag so tightly his knuckles whitened. The man walked right up. So, it's true. You're still here. Lauren looked between them, confused. Curtis, who is this? Curtis's voice was low, almost pained. This is Marcus. My son. The air seemed to stop moving. Marcus's jaw tightened. Your son. That's rich. You haven't been a father a day in your life. Lauren's breath caught. She had known Curtis carried a past, but she hadn't expected this. Curtis swallowed hard. Marcus, I know I failed you. I was young, angry, and I walked away when I shouldn't have. Not a day goes by that I don't regret it. Marcus scoffed. Save it. Mom did everything. You don't get to play the hero now. The words cut deep, but Curtis didn't flinch. You're right. She did everything. And I can't undo the years I wasn't there. But I'm here now, and I'm not running anymore. Lauren watched the tension coil between them, her heart breaking for both. Marcus shook his head, turning away. I don't need anything from you. Not now, not ever. Curtis reached out, his voice shaking. You might not, but maybe I need something from you. A chance. Even just a conversation. Marcus hesitated, his back still turned. Then, with a sharp breath, he walked away, slamming the car door and driving off. Curtis stood there in silence, the rag falling from his hand into the snow. Lauren touched his arm gently. Curtis. His eyes were wet, though he blinked quickly. That's the unthinkable part, Lauren. Not the storm, not your dad. It's that my past might wreck everything good I've found now. She shook her head firmly. No. The unthinkable isn't your past showing up. It's you standing here, facing it, when you could have hidden. That's what makes you the man I trust, with myself, and with my kids. Curtis stared at her, searching her face as though afraid to believe. Jacob and Molly adore you, she went on. And I need you in my life too. But you've got to let yourself believe you deserve that. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded, slow but certain. Weeks passed. Marcus didn't come back, though Curtis left the shop light on every night, just in case. Lauren visited often, bringing the kids, filling the place with laughter and warmth. And slowly, something shifted. One Saturday, Jacob tugged on Curtis's sleeve. You think Marcus will ever come around? Curtis crouched down, meeting his eyes. I don't know, kid. But I'm gonna keep that door open, no matter how long it takes. Jacob nodded seriously. Then we'll keep it open too. It was a simple promise, but it gave Curtis more hope than he'd had in years. Spring arrived, melting the last of winter's ice. On an afternoon bright with sunlight, a car pulled into the lot again. Marcus stepped out, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes uncertain. Curtis walked out, heart pounding. Marcus, he said quietly. Marcus looked at him for a long moment before muttering, I didn't come here for you. I came because I saw how you treated those kids. Jacob and Molly. You were better to them in a few weeks than you ever were to me. Curtis winced but held steady. And that's something I'll regret all my life. Marcus's voice cracked, just a little. I don't know if I can forgive you. Curtis stepped closer, his tone gentle. You don't have to. But maybe we can start with just knowing each other. One step at a time. There was a long silence. Then Marcus finally nodded. Maybe. And for Curtis, maybe was everything. Lauren watched from the doorway, her heart swelling. She saw in that moment not just a mechanic, not just a rescuer, but a man brave enough to face storms both outside and inside. The unthinkable wasn't the blizzard. It wasn't rejection. It was redemption, messy, imperfect, but real. And it had begun with a choice, to stop for a stranded family in the snow, and to keep opening doors, no matter how cold the world could be.